Well, in a couple of weeks, we will have our next set, Pitch Black, coming out, and pre-releases are already starting within the next week. This is a set that I'm super excited for because it feels like the first set in a long time where it's actually going to shake up the meta a little bit. Yeah, Dragon Balls still the best deck, but there are a lot of decks that are getting buffs because of new cards, and we've even got some new decks joining the format, including the Hide and Sneak deck. I've made a lot of videos recently talking about this deck specifically because I'm actually very excited for it. I do think it will be a real contender, and it definitely feels like one of the strongest single prize decks in the format moving forward. With the recent second place at the Japan National Championships, it's a deck that a lot of people are looking forward to as a counter to Dragon Ball, and it feels like one of the few single prize decks that actually has a decent matchup into it. With that being said, there's really no consensus way to play the deck right now from what I've seen. There's a lot of different lists out there using different A specs and different Pokemon within the deck, so even though it is more of a kind of simple deck, I would say, there are a lot of layers to it that just haven't really been figured out yet. So today I want to just kind of showcase some of the best ways to play the deck right now from what we've seen in Japan so far, and kind of give my thoughts on what I think the best A spec is for this deck as it releases. And if you guys enjoy this video, make sure you stick around to the end and let me know in the comments what deck you think will win the World Championships this year. Will it be Dragon Ball, or will it be any of these other decks like the Hide and Sneak deck? Let me know. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk here about the Hide and Sneak deck and some thoughts that I have on the A specs for the deck and just kind of different builds of the deck that I've seen so far online. Right now it's a very versatile deck. There's a lot of different ways to play it. Obviously, Dhelmise is going to be your main attacker for the most part because it hits for 170 damage. So a very strong single prize Pokemon that's able to do a lot of damage. That's always a good thing. And then we have the supporting cast of the Hide and Sneak Pokemon, which most of the time we are trying to discard them, but there are situations where we do want to attack with them. Before I talk too much about that, I do want to go ahead and make a comparison here to the Okie Dokie deck, because this is a deck that we have right now in the format. It's a single prize deck. It also hits for 170, and it's not really doing that great. It's kind of just at the bottom of the tier list, I would say. You look back at the NAIC results, for example, not very many people play this deck. Not very many people made day 2 with this deck or did well with it at all. And that's because it is a deck that has its flaws. So on the surface level, it's kind of like, okay, we're doing the same thing as that deck, we're punching for 170, but there's reasons why the Hide and Sneak deck looks to be a lot better. One of the big problems with Okie Dokie is that it has a very bad Dragon Ball matchup. You do play things in this deck like Battle Cage to try to help suppress that or, you know, make it a little bit better, but it doesn't really do the job, and for the most part, Okie Dokie just loses to Dragon Ball. And it really kind of is that simple on paper as to why Hide and Sneak seems to be a much better deck. It just has a much better Dragon Ball matchup. You have the Clefairy on your bench, which means that you can hit for weakness with Dhelmise, and honestly that fixes a lot of your problems in my opinion. And it's also a lot more self-sufficient than a deck like this. Okie Dokie requiring 2 energies. One of them has to be a Prism or Legacy energy to activate that Dark typing to be able to get the benefit of that with the extra HP and the extra damage. With Dhelmise, you just need 4 Hide and Sneak Pokemon on the discard, and from there all you need is 1 energy to attack with. Very simple to get going. I feel like with Okie Dokie, you're really prone to things like Unfair Stamp. If you don't have energy in your hand, you can't get that draw power going. So there's a lot of things with this deck specifically that I feel like Hide and Sneak doesn't really have those problems as much. I mean, every deck is going to be kind of weak to things like Unfair Stamp, but I think there's ways that we can build this deck to kind of get around that. And overall, I think the biggest reason why Hide and Sneak will be a better deck than something like Okie Dokie is because you have that favorable or at least even Dragon Ball matchup. And that's where I think some of these Hide and Sneak Pokemon really come in clutch. For the most part, like I said, you want to be punching with Dhelmise like every turn for 170, but I do think it's very nice to be able to have a Banette on your bench. A Pokemon where if you get Unfair Stamped, you can go ahead and attack and search for any card that you want to get right back into the game. That's always a good idea whenever you just have nothing you can do and you're able to punch for some damage and get any card that you want. Obviously very helpful. And I think the other thing that this deck has that a lot of these other single prize decks don't have is that you do have the Sinistcha here to help clean up attacks. I think with other decks like Honchko, for example, you sometimes find yourselves being like just short of a knockouts, which means that you have to go all in on that next turn for that knockout. So you basically have to take 2 turns to get knockouts. With something like Dhelmise, you're able to punch something for 170, like a Pheasantipede, and then you're able to punch something else for 170, like an Ogerpon, for example. And then you can clean those up with Sinistcha and be able to take double knockouts, essentially. So I think it's really helpful to have a way to kind of add that extra damage on top of what you're doing. That way you can help clean up those knockouts across the board. Now, what's really interesting from what we've seen with these Hide and Sneak decks is that there really are kind of 2 different decks or 2 different versions of the deck. With Spiritomb and then without Spiritomb. So what we saw at the Japan National Championships was a non-Spiritomb build of the deck, where you really just want to focus on punching with Dhelmise, winning that prize trade as you're only attacking with single prizers, and just kind of winning games like that, essentially. The other version of this build, which has been pretty popular, I would say, from what I've seen online, is the Spiritomb build here, which has the Soul End attack. So once you have 13 or more hide and seek Pokemon in your discard pile, you get to choose 2 of your opponent's Pokemon and quadruple the number of damage counters on each of them. So with a build kind of focused on Spiritomb, it's a build where I feel like you're wanting to attack more early on with Sinistcha to be able to spread damage, because then you can quadruple that damage later on and take these big knockouts. So that's kind of the difference between those 2 versions. You've got the Dhelmise focus build where you're really just focusing on taking knockouts with Dhelmise, and then you have the Spiritomb build here where you're kind of more focused on getting that spread damage, being able to quadruple that later on, and being able to do way more damage later on in the game. Because essentially once we use Matcha Spin and we have 40 damage on a Pokemon, we can turn that 40 into 160. And then if you use Spiritomb again, you can double or quadruple that again, and then you're just doing ridiculous damage. It's kind of insane. And then obviously that works with, you know, Banette as well. If you do 80 damage, you can quadruple that. Even if you have Dhelmise, you can just set up a nice big attack on something like a Mega Kangaskhan, being able to go for that attack as well. So a lot of cool stuff you can do with the Spiritomb. It's obviously a little bit harder to set up, but I think that's where these different aspects really come in clutch, and you can kind of decide how you want to build your deck. As far as getting hide and seek Pokemon in the discard pile, pretty universally, the 3 cards on the left that you're seeing here is what we are seeing in every single build. So we've got the new supporter Gwynn here, where we're able to discard up to 2 Pokemon and draw 3 cards for each Pokemon discarded in this way. So a great way to get those Pokemon in the discard and to be able to draw more cards. We also got the classic Ultra Ball here, very simple. You get to discard 2 cards and find a Pokemon. And then we also have the Prism Tower, of course, which universally is the stadium that this deck is playing. I have not seen any other stadium for this deck. So Prism Tower is a great card for discarding those Pokemon and just being able to draw more cards. It's just really good overall. The other supporter that we've seen is the Explorer's Guidance. This is not in every build. Like, there's a lot of builds that don't play this card, but I do think that it can be good, especially if you're running that Spiritomb build where you want to be able to see more cards, you want to be able to discard Pokemon faster, and you're kind of playing heavier counts of these Pokemon. You're more likely to draw into them, and then you can just discard them off of this card here. So I think for the Spiritomb build, Explorer's Guidance makes a lot of sense. For the non-Spiritomb build, it might not be a great choice. Let's talk about the aspects here. Obviously, Unfair Stamp is not on the screen here. I think Unfair Stamp is a potential option. I've seen that in some builds as well, but for the most part, these are the 3 aspects that I think are worth playing and that I have been seeing lists for as well. I think they each have their benefits, so it really kind of depends on which route you want to go. Brilliant Blender is a card that this is kind of more for the Spiritomb build, I would say, where you really need to get those Pokemon in your discard pile. And what this allows you to really do is just kind of search your deck and get those Pokemon in the discard pile faster, and it also kind of helps thin your deck as well. So it's a really good card for getting those Pokemon in the discard faster. That way you can attack earlier with Sinistcha. That way you can, you know, kind of mid-game use Brilliant Blender to hit that 13 number for Spiritomb. I think it's a really good card for that. Again, the non-Spiritomb build, probably not the best choice because you don't really need to get those high numbers of Pokemon in the discard pile. It's more consistent with the fact that you could set this up turn 1 if you're playing Petrol or something like that, but I think for the most part, that is an aspect that makes a lot of sense for the Spiritomb version of the deck, and will definitely kind of be the aspect of choice in my opinion for that version. The other 2 cards here I think are very, very good for the non-Spiritomb version of the deck, and it really kind of depends on what you want. I think they both have their benefits. I personally have been enjoying Secret Box. I think it's a good card for being able to just get a couple of Pokemon in the discard pile like pretty early on once you draw into this card, and just being able to consistently kind of set up. It allows you to get your Prism Tower down. You can grab a Gwyn and a Poké Pad and be able to use Gwyn next turn and discard the Pokemon that you got off of Poké Pad. You can also play this with tool cards, which I will get into with my list of the deck so far. I think there's a lot of cool tool cards that you can play in this deck to kind of help fix some of those weaknesses that the deck does have. So I do think Secret Box is a really good card for consistency. Whereas Legacy Energy, I think, is a really good card for, I would say, just kind of matchups against the field for the most part. I don't think it's great necessarily against something like Dragapult because they have ways to like not trigger Legacy Energy. They can move damage with Monkey Dory, and yeah, you're playing Patrat for the most part, but they've got Watchtower and stuff like that to shut it off. So I think that Dragapult can definitely get around Legacy Energy, but I think Legacy Energy is really good into a lot of other matchups, like some of these single prize decks. You know, if you go up against a Honchkrow or something, or a mirror match, for example, or something that, like, you know, a Wellspring Ogerpon that's able to like do damage to multiple things. Like, I think Legacy Energy really helps with those types of matchups by being able to kind of offset that prize trade and just allow you to win more often. So I think Legacy Energy is kind of better against the field if you want a better matchup in a certain decks, whereas Secret Box I think is going to be a more consistency card that's going to allow you to play the games more often than not and be able to just consistently set up and do damage faster. So here we have 3 different lists that I'm going to show, one for each A spec. I'll kind of give my thoughts here. So first up, this was a list that I saw on Twitter. I think it's from a Japanese city league, I think, or not a city league, a what's it called, gym battle, gym challenge, something like that, basically like Japanese locals. So this was a list that won one of them, and this is going to be the Spiritomb / Brilliant Blender type of build here. So you'll see here that most of these lists that are playing Spiritomb are playing 4 counts of the hide and sneak Pokemon. I have seen some of them where they'll play like 3 Shuppet and then 4 of everything else. So it kind of just depends on what you want, but I do think it makes a lot of sense to like run 4 of each one just to be able to consistently find those Pokemon and discard them faster. Also playing things like the Clefairy, the Blood Moon to do extra damage at the end of the game, and then of course the Patrat to kind of deal with Monkey Dory. And like I mentioned earlier, with this type of build here, you're playing a lot of different cards that can discard cards faster. So you got Brilliant Blender, you've got Gwynn, you've got Ultra Ball, and you also have the Explorer's Guidance, as well as the Prism Tower here. And then we also have Surfer here for some extra draw power and that ability to switch around. And what's really nice about this type of deck is that your hide and sneak Pokemon are basically protected on the bench from things like Dusknoir and Dragon Ball and stuff like that, which means that all your opponent can typically do is just punch whatever's in the active and take a prize card, and that obviously takes time to get your 6 prize cards. So by the time they're down to 1 or 2 prize cards, you've already spread that damage, and you can usually close the game out with Spiritomb. Now this here is the Japanese Championship 2nd place list that I've shown off in a previous video as well. This is the Legacy Energy build. So with this one, as you'll notice, it's very different. We're playing much lower counts of the hide and sneak Pokemon. We are playing the Dudunsparce engine in this one. The other version here does not play any other additional draw engine. This one here does play the Dudunsparce engine, allowing you to just draw into your cards that you need. We've playing cards here like Kieran to be able to do extra damage and also have a switching option. Have your account of Clefairy as well to be able to consistently beat Dragon Ball. And again, with this type of build, your goal is to punch with Dhelmise, be able to do that damage. We have the Sinistcha as an option to help close out games if we need it, but for the most part, we are attacking with Dhelmise, and that is the strategy here. And then we're able to close games out with things like Blood Moon or Saluda to be able to do that extra damage. And I think a build like this with Legacy Energy, this is like a consistency build type of thing. Like this is a build that I would play if you want to be able to consistently get your Pokemon in the discard pile, you know, by turn 1, turn 2. That way you can attack with Dhelmise as soon as possible. Now last up here, this is a list that I built, just kind of testing it out a little bit. I've been playing on TCG Masters, just kind of playing against Dragon Ball, playing against other decks and stuff like that, and just kind of seeing what I like so far. And obviously this is not a finalized list or nothing like that, but again, I have been enjoying the Secret Box, and I took a little bit of inspiration from Jackson Ford's list with the Blaziken Dragapults at NAIC, by playing like a Secret Box kind of build with things like Lillie's Pearl in that build. And I think honestly in a deck like this, it kind of makes sense if you're going to play Secret Box to play a heavier tool counts, just to really get the benefit of that. So my thought process by building this version of the deck here is that we have Secret Box to be able to find a tool card. Playing 1 copy of Lillie's Pearl can be nice against things like Dragapult. Whenever you have to actually play the Clefairy, which is against Dragapults, it allows you to essentially turn Clefairy into a 1 prizer. And essentially what you're doing is you're not giving Dragapult any way to take 2 prize cards, unless they go for like a double Dhelmise knockout or something like that later on. But there's no way for them to just kind of respond by knocking out Clefairy, because then they're only taking 1 prize card, which really doesn't do a whole lot for them. I think the other thing with this deck specifically is it is weak to Watchtower, because that kind of is our draw power. Like, so one of the things as a Dragon Ball player that really can kind of help you win games is when you go like Watchtower and Unfair Stamp in the same turn, kind of shutting off your opponent's draw power and also just putting them into a low hand size. And I think one way that we can kind of combat that is with the Lucky Helmets. I think Lucky Helmet's a really good card. We've seen other decks, other single prize decks play that card. Alakazam, we've seen some Honchkrow builds as well play the Lucky Helmets, and I think in a deck like this it makes a lot of sense as well, just allowing you to kind of get yourself back into the game. It could be good early on as well, allowing us to draw more cards, get more Pokemon in our hands that we can discard. And so I really like the idea of playing Lucky Helmet. I think even just 1 would be fine. We don't necessarily have to have 2, so we can probably cut 1 and add it somewhere else. But I do think that something like this makes a lot of sense for the deck, allowing you to kind of counter things like Watchtower, allowing you to turn Clefairy into a 1 prizer, and we still have a lot of consistency cards here. I think with Secret Box, there's a lot of potential to try a lot of different things. This is what I've been enjoying so far. I like the idea of having the Lucky Helmet and having Lillie's Pearl, so that's kind of what I've been running right now. Obviously, I have to play more to really see if I enjoy it, but So far, it's kind of a base idea that I have for the Secret Box version of the deck. That's what I've got so far with this hide and sneak deck. I will be playing this a lot as soon as it drops. It's a deck that I'm highly considering once regionals roll around again, kind of testing it out and seeing if I want to play it at a regional. We'll have to kind of wait and see with the World Championships to see how it does, but let me know your thoughts on the deck below and which version of the deck you want to play, and I will catch you guys in the next one.